This episode is brought to you by Tech Partner News. Our sister channel publication CRN Australia is rebranding to techpartner.news on the 1st of April. Make sure you bookmark techpartner.news in your browser, subscribe to the newsletter, and register for our lineup of events including Pipeline, the Impact Awards, Channel Meets, the MSP Index Program, and Fast 50. Hello and welcome to the iTnews podcast. Our guest this week is Mark Potter, the Chief Information Officer at Optus. Optus has stood up a unified data platform that brings data from across a number of repositories into an Azure-based lakehouse environment. Mark walks us through this large program of work, which is continuing, but he starts where the iTnews podcast often does, discussing key priorities of the company's IT strategy.
It'd be useful just to understand a little bit at a high level about Optus IT.
The Optus IT function provides IT services Optus-wide. We pulled resources into a centralised team a couple of years ago. The team is accountable for our applications, our data, our infrastructure, the network that we consume as an organisation. The function is not accountable for the network that's commercialised. That's led by a peer of mine, Tony Baird, who recently joined the organisation. With regard to the IT function itself, there are a number of business unit specific functions that we have in place. A CIO supporting our consumer business and a team that sits below that person. A team and CIO for our enterprise and business function, and a team that sits below that person. Similarly for corporate functions as well. In addition, within the structure, we have a team dedicated to our data platforms and analytics. We have a team dedicated to our infrastructure, workplace technologies, our use of cloud, on-prem, etc. And then we have a number of, let's call them control functions as well. The Enterprise Delivery Office, doing all the enterprise portfolio management, sequencing delivery is one. Another is centralised architecture, guiding the organisation. And last and certainly not least is our cyber security function as well. That's a broad makeup of the IT function and how it fits into the broader Optus organisation.
You mentioned it's all centralized. Those divisional CIOs, I don't know how you refer to them internally, but the ones that were for consumer and for enterprise, are they in the central function as well, or do they sit distributed with the business?
Sometimes it's hard to tell, and I think that's a measure of success. Those teams are hardlined through to me, the CIO for the organisation. You'd call them dotted into the business units. But as I said, it is hard to tell. They are the CIOs on the leadership teams of each of those MDs, also on my leadership team, and they really bring IT and the business together in a way that avoids that persistent complaint that IT is slow and expensive, and from an IT side, that the business units are trying to work out what their requirements are. It sort of brings that together in a way that means that we're working as one team.
Does the Optus IT strategy follow the same structure, alignment to all those individual technology domain areas you mentioned?
If we think about the key themes or priorities that IT is working on, one relates to really solidifying the technology foundation for the organisation and win back customer trust. Another priority relates to enabling our businesses to outcompete in what is a very challenging market. The third priority is really ensuring that we're positioning the organisation for the future. And so when we're talking about that first priority, it isn't really business unit specific. Looking at things like disaster recovery, looking at things like end of life and support, looking at things like our cyber controls are across the organisation. And so we will set enterprise priorities for how we progress down through that thematic. Whereas supporting the business to outcompete, the strategies around that are hand in glove with each of those business segments. Finally, in the way that we're thinking about positioning Optus for the future, we tend to take much more of an Optus-wide approach around that. That's dealing with what's the enterprise architecture need to look like in 3 to 5 years? What does our workforce need to look like? what are the skills we need access to, who are the partners that we want to be working with. So it's really a combination of where it makes sense to wear an enterprise hat to get the best outcome, we wear an enterprise hat. In other areas where it's very aligned with specific segment needs, we wear a segment orientation.
We're talking today about a specific program of work, the Unified Data Platform. Where does that fit into those three overarching priority areas? Is that in the tech foundations? Is it in positioning the organization for the future? Is it across multiple?
It's across all three. The Unified Data Platform that we've worked with Microsoft, Databricks and TechHam to bring to life over the last year or two really helps with establishing the foundation. The controls around that data platform, for instance, the level of user access, which can be defined at a cell level, is all around rebuilding trust, protecting our data, protecting our customers' data. The level of encryption with how that data is stored is protecting, again, customer information. So there's an element of that platform that lends itself to foundational. There's also an element of that platform that lends itself to outcompeting in the marketplace as well, through being able to take much better decisions in a more timely way with better data, to be able to surface a greater degree of personalisation that's fit for purpose for our customers. So there's an element of the platform which is also allowing us to compete in the moment. The last area around really positioning Optus for the future, we do think that this is a future-proof platform for the organisation. The fact that it's sitting on Azure means that it's evergreen from a lifecycle management perspective. The cloud-based orientation of it also is great for what we need with burst capacity and other things, and is providing a foundational capability for AI and other leading technologies as well is key. So the Unified Data Platform supports Optus with those three objectives of ours: to strengthen the foundation, to enable ourselves to outcompete, whilst positioning the organisation for the future.
What were the origins of the Unified Data Platform project? Because I think you'd been at Optus for around 6 to 8 months when the project came about, or was it already on the table when you arrived?
The project was really initiated through a number of catalysts. One was that we had been using a very well-known traditional data warehouse in the organisation for many years. That was approaching a key lifecycle management event. We needed to either work through an upgrade pathway or a change pathway that was getting to a level where we needed to think about support for that platform going forward. That was a key catalyst. We're also getting much more comfortable with having critical workloads on cloud at that point in time as well. The proof points around that and our own organisational capability have been growing, which enabled us to have alternate solutions on the table. And we were looking to not merely go through some sort of upgrade process, but ultimately deliver a different data capability out the other side. Soon after I joined, I then took the decision, based upon the work that had been done, to progress down the TechM Azure Databricks pathway.
What are some of the key use cases for data internally, and how were these previously executed? So before you went on the Unified Data Platform project, how was data stored? How much data did you have? And what kind of use cases were some of the biggest ones internally?
Optus has had a number of very substantial either data warehouses or data marts across the organisation. What we've been doing is consolidating, where it makes sense, those data platforms. The way that we're operating and our target is the Unified Data Platform as the Optus data lakehouse for the organisation, but not centralise everything into that single repository, but to use a data fabric to reach into very specific data stores that still make sense to have federated. So what we've driven is a much higher degree of data consolidation, but we're not executing a strategy of one data mart for the organisation. Historically, the vast majority of our enterprise reporting had been coming off our data warehouse that we had. We'd been using that to drive key decisions and personalisation. However, due to data latency, The personalisation wasn't always fit for purpose, and there are opportunities to improve the data latency. And so the use cases have either been your typical management, business performance reporting, driving business outcomes, key decisions. You might think of credit decisioning, for instance, other decisions that relate to campaigns, churn reduction, attrition, etc. And then more dynamic decisioning and support of personalisation and customer interactions have really been the basis. Those use cases still generally hold true, but with better timely data, which is more accessible, being able to execute those use cases to a higher degree of accuracy, sophistication, and timeliness.
Just going back to the architecture, you mentioned that data remains in the source systems and using the data fabric to bring in data on an as-needed basis into the lakehouse environment and combine it with other data that might be in there natively. Right. So was the fabric architecture, was that always part of the plan, or did that emerge when you were going through evaluation or the discussions about how you would architect this?
It's been an expectation from the get-go that although we will look to centralise more of the data and make that accessible through the unified data platform, that it's not practical to store everything in one place. And so the architecture is always considered and accounted for federated data, but in a way that is really deliberate in its design and control architecture.
In terms of the way that the program was kicked off, and this is interesting from a fabric perspective, how did that play out with data owners? I assume that data owners were more on board with that model, particularly when they'd sort of source systems out in the business, because they would still have ultimate control and have ultimate responsibility for the upkeep of their specific data sets, and also have some sort of rights to approve who had access to it through the fabric.
I think a single data repository would generally be viewed as becoming a bit of a blocker to the dynamicism of the business, the agility of the business. So adopting this fit-for-purpose approach was something that our business colleagues were able to get on board with. A single repository tends to take you past the point of diminishing returns and take you beyond being cost effective. We're very conscious of cost. We're very conscious of CapEx and needing to flow that into high priority initiatives. And so adopting fit for purpose certainly was something our business colleagues were able to support.
How did you come to the conclusion of going down the Azure Databricks Tech M path as the vendor and integrator partnership that would put this solution together? And as an adjunct to that, what was the relationship between those parties and Optus in terms of actually putting this system into play within the telco?
Optus has had quite a strong history with Microsoft and with TechM over a number of years. And the relationship, certainly while I've been in the organisation, has been founded upon brutal honesty, both ways. Sometimes that can be pretty confronting, but it has really met with a roll one sleeve up and go after the agreed outcome and not let business cards and organisations fracture what we're trying to achieve. The bipartisan commitment has been exceptional, and it has not been an easy program. Databricks linking into Azure was also a very strong partnership. Databricks were newer to Optus, where we didn't have that history. But we looked at that consortia of trusted execution partner, trusted with the technology, a partner who would not only help with the implementation, but then with the support, so that if you build it, you run it, that also helps create a longer term mindset around the solutioning. Then with the leading tech company in Databricks was the consortia that really we were most comfortable with.
You mentioned some very specific attributes there around working with specific partners. How do you actually enable that? Because you mentioned not letting the program be derailed by different interests and really rolling their sleeves up and getting it done side by side with Optus Tech. Structurally, how does that work? Are they sat internally with you? They obviously have to be treated as equals in the business with Optus IT to have that ability to execute.
It's very much one team within the organisation and co-located as much as possible. So the vast majority of delivery was done through teams out of our Optus Sydney campus. The senior leadership of Optus, TechM, Databricks, and Microsoft did not operate in a steering group get-together once a month, once a quarter to look over a dashboard. The leadership were very engaged in challenging the delivery teams, trying to surface issues, trying to challenge and identify things that may derail us later, but also resolve issues. And when there were times that very senior leaders need to come together once a week to work through issues, we did that as needed. The leadership was engaged in the delivery of the program, not opining on the delivery of the program.
And just so I understand, in terms of bringing in partners to aid on this, was this because Databricks was a new technology within Optus and you needed specific skills around Databricks architecture and best practice, or were there other specific things you were looking for in going down this particular path?
It's a great question. A number of skills and scale that we needed to access to execute the program. Certainly Databricks was a new technology to Optus at the time. If you will, the clock back a little, our use of Azure was still pretty emergent at that point in time as well. And so ensuring that we were establishing that Azure capability in a really fit for purpose and future-proof way was also really critical for us. However, this is still a really large program of work. So actually getting the migrations done from one platform to another, getting all the transformations done, being a lot more real time, the complement batch and so on was key for us as well. So both the complexity of the program, the fact that we were dealing with some emergent technologies, at least for Optus at the time, along with the scale of the program, resulted in us wanting to partner with the consortium.
You mentioned delivery there, and I think it's probably useful to understand a little bit about the delivery itself. Can you talk a little bit about how the UDP program is phased and where you're up to with the implementation?
As I mentioned, we were approaching a life cycle event with our existing warehouse. So phase one of the program was in large part a lift and shift to migrate off one platform and on to another. What we've been doing more recently is then the optimization of that lift and shift in terms of optimizing the data footprint, optimizing the workloads, optimizing the cost structure of that. What we've also done is migrated onto the platform a number of real-time data stores as well that support our channels in their access to data to support specific journeys. The reason for doing that was it takes load off our core by having the channels interacting, if you like, with a cached repository of data. What it also does is add resilience to our architecture that if there was an issue with a downstream system, we've got customer journeys that can still operate because they're using the cached data in other systems as well. So we've been progressing down that path. We've now got 2 other very substantial data marts that we're in the process of consolidating onto the unified data platform, which will further enrich that repository. What's next? We continue to leverage the platform with further data, and what we will continue to do is bring the use cases down to the platform that support even more personalisation of our customer experiences, improvement in our internal reporting to drive even greater business performance, and extend the data mesh to pick up other repositories that ought not come onto the platform, but in terms of the data that's necessary for us. We're also applying AI around the platform at the moment as well. UDP will support a number of our AI-driven use cases.
That's the episode for this fortnight. Stay tuned for the next episode. And for all the latest headlines and happenings in Australian technology news, head over to itnews.com.au.